If you're an entrepreneur and you've been struggling with your anxiety, I'm gonna give you 3 tips on how to overcome your anxiety so that way you can take more actions in your business. Now, here's the thing about these tips. These are tips that I only share in my private therapy sessions. So by you watching this, you're gonna get insights on how to help yourself, your business go to the next level. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the episode. So about 3 years ago, I went to my first ever conference when it comes to being an entrepreneur. And I remember going there feeling like an imposter. I remember going there thinking, man, there's all these people here that's making 6 figures, 7 figures, 8 figures, and even 9 figures, so $100 million. And I remember going there thinking, man, I'm not making any money. As a matter of fact, I was losing money at the time. And I remember thinking, man, I don't belong here. I'm not gonna grow. I'm not gonna become one of these guys that I see on stage. But I remember taking this information, right, and applying it. And here's the thing, the information that they gave, it was a lot, but I took one piece, right? And that one piece, it was called copywriting. I remember taking that information, applying it to my business, and how it just changed over that course of that year. And I remember taking my business going from one that was losing a lot of money to one that does pretty well based on who you ask, right? And I remember going to that conference and they had this offer. They had this offer to join this high ticket program. Now at the time, the high ticket program, it was a pricey price. It was $20,000. I remember going there thinking like, yo, like who pays $20,000 for coaching, right? Like that's insane. But when they gave that offer, I saw tons of people running to the back of the room, right? And what that did for me was that made me feel even more like an imposter. It made me feel bad that I didn't have the money to actually invest in myself at the level that they were investing. So I passed that year. And the next year I went to the conference and I was doing a little bit better financially. I remember thinking, maybe I should join, maybe I should do this. But at the time, I was getting married, we were buying a house, right? We was having a son, right? So I was like, man, I don't think right now it's a good idea, right? It's not the right time. And I passed. And then the following year, right? So last year, I remember they gave the offer again and it was a little bit more. And I remember sitting there thinking to myself, what if, right? What if I do join and I become one of these people that are on this stage? Because here's the thing, guys, and I gotta tell you this, and this is a little off topic, but trust me when I say this is gonna be very valuable to you, right? You wouldn't believe how low the standards are when it comes to being average. You know, there's so many quotes out there when it comes to being an entrepreneur, but quotes about a lot of stuff, right? About on average, how much money do people make? On average, how long does a marriage last, right? It's so many things out there, but when you look at the average, trust me when I say, that is a very low bar. So I remember thinking to myself, what if I do join? What if I do this? And I remember thinking about it and started to get anxious, right? I started to get very, very nervous. And I actually got so nervous that I went to one of my friends who was at the conference, who I respected. And I remember asking him, what did you do when you came across your first high ticket coaching opportunity? He said he took it, but also he said that all the people that you look up to, right? So Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, right? All these people that are great by themselves still had a coach. And with that, they were able to go to heights that they'd never reached before. So why do you think you're any different? And that was his message to me. And when he said that, I was like, yo, I gotta join this program. And that's what I did, guys. I went and I signed up, and all the anxiety that I had, right, as I was shaking, giving them my credit card, I remember all the anxiety morphed into excitement. It morphed into motivation. I had this rocket pack strapped to my back, and it was sending me to a stratosphere that I never thought was possible. This is how you can turn your anxiety into action. And I'm gonna talk about this in this podcast. Because right now, you're probably someone that's doing really good, right? That has the skill set. And here's the thing, you may not be able to see it because your anxiety is blinding you. And I'll even say this, if you're someone who doesn't have the results, trust me when I say there's something within you that has the power, that has the ability to overcome what you're going through at this moment. It's just that I have to get you to overcome that anxiety so that way you can become the best version of yourself. And that is why we look up to a lot of people like the Kobe Bryants of the world, because we feel like they were the only people who left nothing on the court, right? They gave it all out, right? They gave every ounce of their body to the sport, to the craft that they have. And that's what we want to do with you. So in this podcast, I'm going with 3 tips that I only share in my private therapy sessions. And this is going to help you to become more confident, but also overcome the anxiety that you have. Now, with that being said, if you're still watching this video, right, probably about 3-4 minutes in, that tells me that you like this topic, you're interested, you're invested. And to show that you're invested, I want you to hit the subscribe button, because in this podcast and on this channel, I share tips that I only share in my private therapy sessions here. And the thing is, they're absolutely free, meaning that you can get high-level advice for nothing. Tell me where you can get that type of advice, right? Tell me where you can get an offer that good. So make sure you hit the subscribe button, and let's jump into point number 1. All right, so point number 1, one of the first and best ways to actually overcome your anxiety and turn it into action is to actually engage in your anxiety, okay? To engage it. So what do I mean by that? So right now, you're probably someone who tends to suppress their anxiety, walk away from it, avoid it. You think anxiety is a devil or a bad thing, and you try to just get away from it as quickly and as far as possible. Well, here's the thing. What if I told you engaging in your anxiety was one of the best things that you can do? Well, here's the thing. That is so true. Now, I'm going to tell you something that you can Google, and you can do that after this podcast. What you can Google is this thing called Yerkes and Dotson's Law. Now, I love this study because what it shows is that having no anxiety is actually bad for your performance, and having too much anxiety is bad for your performance. What you want to have is this optimal level of anxiety, so that way you have the optimal level of performance, because all athletes, all high performers, right? Everyone that you know that does well at what they do, they've had some level of anxiety. It may be the anxiety of making payroll, the anxiety of keeping a roof over their head, or the anxiety of, let's say, just being able to pay simple bills, right? That anxiety actually pushes you to perform, and that's what we need. So what I want you to do with your anxiety is to imagine that it's a person. Imagine that it's an object. Imagine that it's some monster on your boat and you're trying to take your ship to the island where all the treasure is. What I want you to do is just give this anxiety an identity. And once it has an identity, I want you to engage it. Ask your anxiety questions, right? Like if your anxiety was a person and was sitting beside you, what would it say to you, right? Would it say, hey, this is a bad idea. We failed before, we may fail again, right? Like what would your anxiety say? And once it's told you what it's going to say, I want you to then turn around and tell your anxiety what you're wanting to say, right? What you want to say, what you want to do, what you're going to do, right? I don't want you to feel like your anxiety is your God, your king, your president, or your ruler. I want you to feel as though you're the person in charge. And this anxiety is just someone that has some, let's say, advice, right? And now here's the thing about advice. And I see this even with my private clients. They can decide to take it or leave it. And that's what you can do with your anxiety. You can decide, do you want to take the advice that it's giving you, or do you want to leave it? So what does this mean for you? I want you guys to become more curious about your anxiety, right? Imagine that it's something or someone, right? So an object, so that way it has its own identity and you're not over-identifying with it. Once this object, once this anxiety has its own identity, I want you to get curious about it. Another way you can do that is ask yourself, if your anxiety was a shape or an object, what would it look like? See if you can imagine that sitting in front of you. And then I would tell you, imagine seeing if you could slide that object all the way across the room. And then I would tell you, imagine if you could slide that anxiety all the way across the street, right? Down to the point where it's barely in your sight, or even out of sight, if you will. This is how you can engage in your anxiety. Don't try to run away from it. Actually play around with it. And you'll see that it's nothing more than, let's just say, like a bunch of lumpy clothes that's under your bed. Because sometimes people think that, oh man, there's this monster, but it's not. If you take time to look under the bed, you'll find out that that monster that you thought was there is, again, just a pile of old lumpy clothes. All right, point number 2. I love this one. And this one, you can actually make it a game. So this one is called the reverse compass technique. So what I want you guys to do is write down 5 things that you typically do when your anxiety comes about. All right. And we're going to keep this when it comes to entrepreneurship. So when anxiety comes up, what do you typically do in your business that is unhelpful? Do you isolate? Do you withdraw? Do you do activities that are not relevant to your business, right? So working on other people's goals or other, let's say, easier things, if you will, right? Like what are some of these things that you do when anxiety comes up? So now you should have that list. What I want you to do then is write the opposite of that list. So an example is, if you typically avoid doing videos because that gives you anxiety, right? So videos for YouTube. Well, the opposite of that would be doing videos on YouTube, right? Like that's going to be the clear opposite. And you're going to do that for each 5 of those things that you typically do when anxiety sparks. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to pick one of these items and you're going to do it for just 2 minutes. I love this technique. I get this actually from James Clear, Atomic Habits. That is by far my most quoted book in all of my therapy sessions. I suggest you check it out. But what you're going to do is for 2 minutes, you're actually going to engage in doing the opposite of what your anxiety typically tells you to do. Now, here's a great quote by Marcus Aurelius. He is a Stoic, but also he is, I want to say he was like one of the kings back in the Roman Empire. And trust me, you probably heard of him. But he said something that was really great. He said, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. So what that means is that you've always had the answers all along. They've been in front of you and they've been hiding under the cloak of anxiety. So what I want you guys to do is to find the things that scare you, write them down, and then I want you guys to take 2 minutes and actually do them. And after you do that, the next time you approach these things that scare you, do it for 5 minutes and start to increase your time over the course of time. When you do that, you start to see that the anxiety that you once had will start to decrease in intensity. And that will allow you to become the best version of yourself because now you're taking actions. I'm so glad that you guys made it here to point number 3. That tells me that you guys were very invested in this topic and it's been helpful for you. Now, because you made it this far, always let's save the best for last. So point number 3 is a secret technique. It's a secret weapon, something that I've seen destroy anxiety for almost all my clients. And it's called behavioral activation. Okay, so what is that, right? Like, what is behavioral activation? Well, it is simple. So when someone feels anxious, what they typically do is they do nothing, right? And when they do nothing, the anxiety does nothing but build. It's this compounding effect that starts to happen. Well, when someone starts to take the actions that are aligned with their values, what they do is they slice through that whole anxiety cycle, and it helps them now become the person that they're hoping to be. And what happens is they start to have this positive reinforcement of the feel-good feelings that comes with doing scary things. So I'll give you a great example. Imagine doing a podcast that you were nervous to do and seeing that you had 100 likes or 100 views or 1,000 views or 1,000 subscribers, like after the course of doing it, right? Like it will tell you like, oh, wow, this feels good. Or it'll give you the thought, hey, I'm actually pretty good at this thing that I was once afraid of. When you have that positive reinforcement, guess what you're gonna wanna do? You're gonna wanna do it again, right? That's how it works. That's behavioral activation at its best. But here's the thing, it also works against you. So what it looks like is when you don't take these actions, when you just hide under your anxiety and do nothing, right? Let imposter syndrome just ruin your life, it does nothing but grow. And it becomes that much harder to get out of that pit of anxiety. But here's the thing, guys. As I was saying with this technique, it's compounding in both ways. If you're doing nothing because of your anxiety, it's gonna compound against you. But if you are doing things in spite of your anxiety, your courage, your confidence, right? Your overall happiness, that will start to compound in the positive way. So what we want to do is just ask ourselves, what is a thing that is aligned with our values? And can I just do it for a little bit? When you do that, you'll do something, or you will unlock something called behavioral activation. Because here's the thing, anxiety, it has a cycle. And what that cycle looks like is anxiety will pop up, you'll start to avoid it, and then you start to feel good, but that feel good feeling is only short-lived. Because what that would produce, or the outcome of that, will be long-term anxiety. So I'll give you guys a great example. If someone gave you an offer to speak on stage in front of 100 people, and you say, you know what, I don't want to do it, I can't do it, or you say, hey, I got another engagement, you'll go, whew, that feels good, right? But what that does is it makes the next time you get an opportunity to speak in front of stage, it makes it that much harder because you've never done it, right? It's something that's still foreign to you. This is something I talked about in a previous podcast when I talked about the 3 myths to self-improvement. And one of those myths is that we believe that self-improvement is like riding a bike. Totally false. When you stop, you have to rebuild those muscles. When you ride a bike and you know how to do it, you could take 10 years off of riding a bike and get right back on it, right? Hence the term, it's like riding a bike. So what I want to tell you guys is that, hey, the anxiety that you're feeling, it can actually be transformed into action if you follow these steps. And what I'm gonna do right now is go over these 3 steps real quick, and then we'll get you guys out of here. So step number 1 that we went over was that you need to engage in your anxiety instead of suppressing it. And what you can do is just have a sense of curiosity about your anxiety. You can even make fun of it, give it an identity, imagine that it's an object, and play around with it, ask it questions. Do all these things to show yourself that this anxiety is nothing more than just a bunch of lumpy clothes under the bed, okay? And I gave a great example of that. Next, you can use your anxiety as a reverse compass. So write down the thing that happens when your anxiety comes up, right? And you're gonna write down 5 of those. So when you feel anxious, what do you typically do, right? Give me 5 of those, and then write down the opposite of those 5. When you have that, I then want you guys to take 2 minutes to engage in the very thing that was scaring you. And then the last point that I made is behavioral activation. This is where you take an action that is aligned with your values and you engage in it as a way to slice through that whole anxiety cycle that people fall victim to. Because if you let anxiety control you for the first day, it has a higher likelihood of controlling you for the second day. But if you cut through that anxiety cycle, day 2 of you on this progress, right? So day 2 of you, let's say, recording content, or day 2 of you going to a club or a bar by yourself, it makes it that much easier on day 2, 3, all the way up to day 100 if that's the goal. So my name is Coach Wells. I'm a licensed therapist. Thank you for checking out this podcast. Leave a comment below. I'd love to hear from you guys. What do you think about this show? All right, see you later.